Good morning. It's Wednesday, August 17th, and over the past few days I was catching up on sermons from church that I missed while I was away, and I went for a run yesterday and listened to this past weekend's, and we're going through Hebrews 11, which is called the Hall of Faith, and we're going through each of the biblical people who have been listed as having faith. And Sundays was all about Rahab, and she was introduced in Joshua 2 as Rahab the prostitute. And the pastor was sharing some really neat history that I just love, that shares so much into who God is and his character. But in the passage, she is described as Rahab the prostitute. And back in those times, our pastor said that likely she was essentially similar to sex trafficking, or she was sold into the sex slave trade, likely because he ran into debt and needed money. And so this would have been at a very young age. So she's a Canaanite. So the Canaanites were very violent and not believers in the Lord. And so Joshua is leading an army at this time, and God shares with him that they will conquer Jericho. And Jericho has this huge wall, and it's a very small city, but it's hard to penetrate because of this wall. And so he sends in some spies to go, examine the wall. And while they're there, they stay with Rahab, and people see the men go into her house and they question her about it, but she stands up for them. And so she hides them, and she says that all the people in the city are aware of their Lord because they had heard about the parting of the Red Sea and all these things that God is doing. And so she says, I believe in your Lord, and asks them to spare her and her family's life when they conquer Jericho, because she knew that with God on their side that would happen. And so there's so many beautiful things, because when they conquer the wall, or the wall is destroyed, they actually go around the city and they walk and they worship in song, ultimately. And the wall comes down without guns, without swords, without anything. And the only piece of the wall that didn't come down is Rahab's home, which is actually in the wall, it says in Joshua. And I just love this picture of protection. And what our pastor said is that God can change your reputation in an instant. And all these people for her whole life probably saw her as a prostitute, and all the shame that comes along with that, and thinking of her as less. But God saves her life, and he saw her heart and her faith, and weaves this beautiful story together where she's saved. She ends up staying with the Israelites. She ends up meeting King Solomon, and he takes her as his wife. So she goes from prostitute to princess. And our God is a God of redemption, and this is what he does. He turns the muck that we're in into beauty, and even through the pain, he can turn it into something beautiful. And I just love this picture. I love God's heart, and I love the prominence that even Rahab as a woman had in this time when women were not even valued. But God saw her, and he sees us, and he can redeem, and he thinks of us as a princess, and he knows our heart. And I just love how this story is such an indication of who God is.